My name is Eric Harless. I'm the head backup nerd here with Enable. I've been on the Enable backup product now for 8 years. I hit my 8-year anniversary earlier this month. However, I've been in the data protection industry or disaster recovery industry for about 25 years. I've worked as a salesperson, a support engineer, a system engineer, but predominantly as product management, helping to build out products and solutions based on successes and failures of a lot of other vendors in the market that you may have grown to either love or hate. So I won't do the name drops there. But if you want to follow me on social or reach out to me so that you can schedule some time to talk about your particular backup needs or backup issues, or have me take a quick look at an escalation or a support case that you might have, talk through deployments or migrations off of a competitive product into Enable Backup, or help solve an API or reporting or configuration problem, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to schedule some time with you to help improve your overall Enable Backup experience, and try to build or foster that community of backup gurus that I'm trying to build with these office hour sessions. So my social media connections on Twitter at @backup_nerd. You can reach me on LinkedIn or via email at eric.harless@enable.com. So office hours, as I said, we're focused here around data protection. Office hours is done, though, by each of our head nerds. So we've got security, automation, we've got sales and marketing. So there's lots of other office hour sessions that are going on conducted by the various head nerds each month. So please do look at those sessions, hop in on some of those, see if they have content or a workflow that fits your needs. From a backup perspective, though, this is all about helping you achieve successful backups, and that's going to increase the likelihood of recovery in the event of ransomware or hardware failures or data corruption, user error, things of that nature. This is a forum for you to provide suggestions or inquiries that might affect the roadmap. I will pass on that kind of information to our product management team. I'll also give you an opportunity at the end of the session today to sign up for our partner advisory groups, which allow you to get that direct interaction with product management and see roadmaps on a quarterly to semi-annual basis from their perspective. This is meant to be a live Q&A open discussion forum, so I've already seen a couple questions drop in. Please, guys, don't be shy. Feel free to drop any questions you might have or follow-up questions in there. And I'll work on answering those. Yeah, I want to foster a community of backup gurus, backup nerds. I'd really like you guys teaching these kind of classes, or monitoring the various forums, Reddits and Facebook groups that are out there, talking to other partners and explaining how you utilize or how you take advantage of the Enable Backup solution to meet your needs and your customers' needs. Obviously, I can talk for hours about the backup product, how it works and how to do various things, but how you guys use it in your real world environments actually has a lot of additional value to other partners. They're going to get that firsthand experience solving MSP problems, whereas I'm doing it in less of a production environment. And then finally, I wanted you guys to become as efficient as possible. Obviously, you're not making money managing a backup solution. You want to be able to manage a solution that is going to be set it and forget it, where you manage by exception. You just see the errors, you just see the alerts, and then you go and you correct those. Honestly, managing 100 or hundreds of devices should be as simple and easy as managing just a handful of backup devices if you've got it configured and monitoring properly. So I want to touch on just a couple of the recent updates. We've got some deadlines that are coming out here in the very near future. So we'll hit these and make sure that you guys are aware of any of those upcoming deadlines and some of the changes in the software. So just a look in review at some of the stuff that we've released, and I guess 21.9, which was a minor UX, pretty much a minor UX update that just posted here in the last day or two. So 21.6 was predominantly focused around the Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint, the Microsoft 365 version of our software. That's available inside of Integrated and Central and the Standalone Backup Edition. We made a change to that, which expands the data retention for up to 7 years now for all of those data sources. Previously, it was just limited to Exchange. That had 7 years of retention. OneDrive and SharePoint were limited to 1 year, but we did extend that automatically inside of the product. Nothing for you guys to do, no changes. You just automatically get that additional retention. There's no additional charge or additional capacity or overage charges around that. It's just a enhancement to the product that everybody will be able to benefit from. 21.7, we introduced some AP user rights enhancements. I'll show you that in the UI here in a few moments. Some improvements around the remote commands, improvements around SharePoint performance, and some user experience or some UI enhancements around recovery testing to ensure that you guys can see more accurately what's going on, see the progress, understand how things are configured, and so on. 21.8, you'll notice each of these, that's the year and the month of the build. So 21.8, we introduced a subscription management portal preview. That's available only to existing beta or preview customers that signed up for that. So if you're not aware of that or aren't seeing that in your UI, it's because you did not sign up for that previously. That should be made available in the general release here, hopefully in the next quarter. Additional improvements around Microsoft SharePoint, around Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365 mailbox detection, and then SharePoint speed improvements. And then we did some user experience or user interface work to ensure that the billable user count was a little bit more in your face and clearly visible, so that we understood shared mailboxes versus unlicensed or unconfigured mailboxes and what we're going to be chargeable from a month-to-month basis versus which ones are non-chargeable or in a shared mailbox state. And then 21.9 minor UX, and I've got some screenshots here on the next few slides that'll show you a little bit more about this as well. One other note, we're working toward a October 1st deadline here for a couple changes around some digital certificates and the name change and spinoff of Enable from SolarWinds MSP. So October 1st is going to be that deadline, and I'll point out a few different things in the user interface you guys are going to be aware of release-wise, okay? So I mentioned the 21.7 release. This was pushed out in middle of June. This was, or actually probably still is, the primary client release for the actual Backup Manager client, although there are updated versions of the Cloud Management UI, the Backup.Management interface, and the UI that's used for Office 365, where you're going to see the 21.8, 21.9, and so on. User enhancements in here for remote commands. So now the remote command layout structure is a lot cleaner, a lot more instructions, a lot more suggestions as far as syntax as you're going through and issuing remote commands. For those of you that aren't familiar with remote commands, they're available in the essential integrated version and standalone versions of Enable Backup. They allow you to push out commands in bulk across devices, that whole manage by exception. So I could push out a GUI password or adjust selections or change exclusions, set up a backup filter or a archive schedule or a throttle across one or hundreds of devices all at the same time with that same setting. This is just going to make it a little bit clearer, a little bit less prone to error, a little bit less requirement to go read the documentation as you're pushing out those remote commands. So hopefully some good user experience enhancements. We also introduced API authentication flags for various users. So users have always had access to the APIs. If you had to log into the console, you could access the API based on your user level. But now, as you are creating users, or as you go back and edit or modify users, what you're going to see now is an option here to enable or disable that API authentication. And I'm going to encourage you guys to go in and look at that for your various users. Select the user pane in the left-hand navigation in standalone Enable Backup, and then confirm which users you want to have that API authentication access, the ability to run APIs or scripts against the Backup.Management interface, and which ones you want to restrict. It's a good security principle there to control or set least privilege access. I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment if we have time. But you just want to make sure that you're not allowing credentials or access that's above and beyond the day-to-day functions of those users, and disable that where appropriate. So additionally, in 21.7, I mentioned there were some enhancements around the billing and the user wording, trying to make that a little bit clearer for customers. So you'll see that under the Office 365 section. You'll see listed as billable users now. Inside of the recovery testing, we introduced some enhancements around the progress. You can see on the right-hand side over here, there's a progress bar now showing, the status of restores that are actually running. That way you can see if a restore is taking longer than expected or what percentage progress it's running at, or even if it's hung at say 90% for a long period of time, those kind of things. 21.7, as I mentioned, that was the predominant client build. We did roll out an auto update plan in the middle of last month, although that was halted or delayed. So due to some changes with our digital certificate, it introduced some unexpected changes with our Mac agent. So for that reason, we did halt or delay the auto update mid-update, and we wanted to do a little bit more communication through release notes, through in-product UI pop-ups, so that we could ensure that our Mac users did get those properly updated and configured following the auto update. So as I said, we moved from the SolarWinds MSP digital certificate into the enabled digital certificate because of the way Mac OS requires a approval for full disk access. When we made that change to the certificate, it disabled or revoked that full disk access from the application. So following the repush of auto update on October 1st, any of your backup agents on Mac that are not currently running 21.7, they'll get upgraded to the new version, and it will disable full disk access for those systems. They will require you to remote into those systems and SSH or local client and re-enable full disk access for the backup manager application. So you should have seen some pop-ups inside of the UI. This release note update has been now available for a couple weeks, but I wanted to point it out to the audience here as well, just in case they missed that. The backups will still continue to function on those Mac devices, although they're going to miss some of the files that are restricted behind that full disk access restriction that Apple introduced in Yosemite, I think it was. Okay. So 21.8, some additional enhanced SharePoint onboarding as part of the Microsoft 365. So this has been GA released. It's available in the backup.management UI for any of your users with Office 365. So improvements around shared mailbox detection. We can see now when a device has been disabled or restricted. It no longer shows up as undefined. It does still show up as a shared mailbox. That makes it a little bit easier, and it helps ensure that we've got an accurate count of billable and non-billable users. Those user counts now are visible in the ad wizard, so you can see up front when you're configuring Microsoft 365, what that user count looks like before you finish the configuration. And then you also see a display of billable users right next to the detected users and deleted users inside of the system, so you can fully understand what your monthly impact is going to be. So the other change I wanted to mention, as we did move from the from the SolarWinds domain into the enable domain, it does also introduce a switchover or a migration for those Microsoft 365 devices. So as you log into your console, if you've got Microsoft 365 devices that you have not migrated over to the new enabled tenant, you will be prompted with this type of view on your screen, which will list those individual domains that you need to grant permissions in order to migrate over. And you do need to do this before October 1st so that you do not interrupt your Microsoft 365 backups. So there was a question in here from Jeffrey, and Jeffrey is asking, how do I set up recovery testing? We're getting some errors. Such a size of the device is over the capacity for a disaster recovery plan. So Jeffrey, the disaster recovery testing that we do, the automated service, it's available inside of backup.management, and let me bring that up inside of the UI so you guys can all see this if you're not familiar with it. Is available over here on the left-hand side navigation of the standalone version of Enable Backup. So standalone Enable Backup, backup.management, that user interface. It's right here. This little looks like a recycle icon. And you'll see in here, I've got some devices that are in my environment, recovery testing plans, and so on. Today, the recovery testing is limited or capped at a 2 terabyte limitation for selected data. If you've got a device that's more than 2 terabytes of selected size, it is automatically obscured or restricted from the automated recovery testing function. I've had some discussions with product management, some other customer requests we've passed along. I can pass your request as well, if you like, to see about having them extend that up to a larger capacity. Obviously, we're doing testing in a hosted environment here, incurring costs and the time and bandwidth and so on around the building of these virtual machines, the boot, the screenshotting, and then the power down and purging of those virtual machines. So I think they were looking at the cost implications of expanding that, time implications, resource implications as well. So it may be something that's on the short-term roadmap. I'm afraid I don't have a confirmation on that, however. I can give you another workaround here. This would only be a short-term test, however. You'd want to go back and undo or confirm or change this later. So what you could do, Jeffrey, is you could go in and take that device. Let's assume that it's a C volume with a terabyte and then a data volume or a couple data volumes that are taking it above that 2 terabyte configuration. If you were to go down and deselect data, deselect the D volume or the E or the Q volume, and get your total selected size down under 2 terabytes, even briefly, and then can run your next backup with that smaller selection. And you could change your backup schedules to run, multiple times during the day if you like, but reduce that backup selection to under 2 terabytes, just the boot drive, possibly. And then after that has completed successfully, you could add it into the recovery testing configuration, and that would allow you to do that test of at least bootable recovery of the boot volume. That's a one-off, it's a manual type of thing, whereas recovery testing runs, once or twice a month. You could do this and have it do that initial boot volume test. What you'd want to make sure you do after that, though, is go back in and reapply those selections to ensure you've got full protection for that system. It's not going to delete any of your histories or remove anything by you doing that. It's just going to get one backup session that is just the boot volume, and then hopefully that would be the one that is going to get kicked off for recovery testing if you add it in, immediately after that. Another option here, it would be not to utilize the automated recovery testing that we do, the hosted service that's a chargeable monthly fee, but to utilize our recovery console. So if you come over to the download section here on the left-hand side, there is an option for the recovery console. You can download the recovery console for 32 or 64-bit Windows and use that to do virtual disaster recovery, continuous recovery. It can boot your recovered machine, generate a screenshot, email it out to you, post it into the dashboard, and that's a fully self-hosted environment that does that recovery testing. And there's no additional charge for that kind of functionality. So 2 ways around that one. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful. I can definitely pass your information along if you'd like to our product management team that you're looking at that. I'd be curious if you could give it to me in the chat or the question section. What is the size of those machines, or this machine you're talking about specifically? What is the current selected size of that system? Do you have other systems that would meet that requirement as well? What kind of sizes do those have? Okay. Let's see where we are here. Another question here. I'm having 2 separate backup issues with 2 other systems. What's the best way to receive live support, not email or chat, where they can troubleshoot the software in real time? So for a scenario like that one, obviously we do offer live phone-based support. That's the primary recommended method to get a live engineer and be able to go through with a frontline or midline or even an application engineer. So if it's a system that is not backing up, or you're in a recovery scenario and you've got a technician on site or a failed server, those kind of situations, obviously you need to gauge the level of criticality or severity with that one. And if it's not severe, email support, chat support inside of product, those kind of things, those are great tools. But if it is critical, or it's a system that just is not backing up, you've not managed to get a good backup on it, those kind of things, and it's now getting some time behind it, definitely call into the support teams. You'll get prompted at the very beginning of the call there to determine whether it's a critical restore type of support, where it'll get you moved into a critical support queue. Obviously, if it's not critical, please don't select that one. You could be jumping in front of customers that have got a legitimate failed server, things of that nature. But self-prioritize there when you come in through those calls, and you will get access to a live support technician. We do staff the support techs 24/7. It is a follow the sun type model, so depending on the region and country you're calling in from, the time of day you're calling in, you'll get technicians in Canada, in the United States, you'll get them in the Philippines, you'll get them in Australia, Belarus, Ireland, and or Edinburgh or Dundee, Scotland. And I may have missed a region or two there also. There's a full follow the sun model there. If you get a technician and then you've already went through those various stages and those diagnostics, or they're asking you for logs, those kind of things, there is a reason for that. For them to escalate or to move some of these type of requests up to dev, they do have to go through a certain checklist of steps, pull logs, debugging, those kind of things, to be able to pass that along. But at the same time, if you do feel like you're spinning your wheels on this or it's not moving along, you can ask to self-elevate or escalate and have them move it over to the next line technician as well. So, do that, based on your expectations and the time involved in your cases. As far as additional escalations, if you've got tickets that are open and they're not moving along, or you'd like somebody to take a look at that ticket and maybe provide some additional insight to it, I'm by all means happy to take a look at a ticket or help with an escalation, things like that one. Assuming it's waiting on our engineering or our dev or our support side, then yeah, I can definitely escalate that and help getting those moved or provide additional insight. If it is in your court though, if it's waiting on information for you back or logs or details, things like that, I would need you to provide that information before I could do the escalation. Okay. So Stu is asking here, Google Workspaces, is that something that we can currently protect, or can we back it up? Or is there anything on the roadmap for it? So Google is an item that is a roadmap item. So Gmail, G Suite, I think is what they were looking at. I don't know, I'm not a big Google user, so I don't know about Workspaces, where that would fall into that environment, or whether it's going to be just the Google virtual hosted desktop component. Might fall into that same category. Definitely some of the Google components are roadmap items. Running inside of a virtualized environment, however, no matter what it is, it's an Amazon or Google or whoever, deploy the backup, manage the backup client, and that guy should be able to see the local volumes, local disk, and be able to capture the data. If not at a volume level, at least at a file and folder, a user documents type of level. So there were a couple questions around the standalone backup side and versus the integrated Essential Edition and the RMM Edition. So at a high level, it's really deployment. The biggest differences between RMM backup, Essential Integrated Backup, and the standalone version that you see at Backup.Management is going to be how it's deployed. Whether it's a checkbox inside of your RMM product, or whether you are going to utilize a AMP or a PowerShell script or other deployment methodology to deploy the backup agent. The second function is going to be single pane of glass. Inside of Essential or RMM, you're going to manage and monitor the backups in that single dashboard. Whereas with the standalone version, you've got a separate UI that's going to give you your visibility into all of your successes, failures, what's online and offline. Third function, API access, the ability to get access to a bit more reporting or customization, things that may not be fully exposed inside of the integrations. Definitely a much higher level of customization. You're going to see the newer features and functions showing up or releasing on the standalone version of Backup, typically, a month or two before you'll see them in the integrated versions, assuming they've been developed for the integrations as well. Nothing's stopping you from utilizing both versions or doing deployment of the standalone version from your RMM or Essential or other third-party RMM tools as well. The key there is a series of automation manager policies I've created and or PowerShell scripts that I've created that allows you to deploy standalone backup from just about any RMM out there. The final difference or change is really going to be around platform support. So we do offer Mac, Linux, and Windows support for standalone backup, whereas you're limited to predominantly Windows inside of the integration versions. One exception being some limited Mac documents functionality inside of the RMM platform. So Marcel here had made a statement or a question. Let's see. We're using it now for a month or so for a lot of customers. One of the questions I've had a couple of times, um, have a couple of times, is a nice one view backup report for the customer. I have a workaround for small customers by setting up per device. Is there an option to set this up and get a single view report for a customer? So Marcel, if you are still in line for that one, this might be worth scheduling a one-on-one session with me. I'll give you guys a link. I'll give you a link to that here in a moment, or reach out to me on email or via social. We can schedule a one-on-one. But I'm going to give the audience a high-level discussion here on how they can set up those consolidated reports. So you can do it partially through an email view perspective. If you were to come in here and look at your customer list, I've got customers from multiple different regions here. So I'll come in and go to my HEH CA, and now I've got just a smaller subset of 8 devices that are available. And I'm showing all devices right now, successes and failures. That's the all devices dashboard, I believe. Let me double check that one. All devices. Sorry, I'm going to step back 1 second and do it again. So I picked an all devices dashboard. And I filtered on my HEH AU, my Australia container. And I've got a handful of devices here. Most of these are looking like they're not a real healthy state. I could go through and further filter this on just unsuccessful or completed with errors or ones that are older than a certain time frame. So any additional filters that I wanted to add, I can now come in here and save the view, and I'll call this all devices AU for my HEH AU partner, and I'll save that as a new view. What I can do next is set that view up as an email view. So we'll go into email views here. I will add a new schedule. I'll pick the user here that I'm going to go to, and I'm going to go to an internal user right now inside of my interface. These are users that have access to the backup.management console. So this is very, very important here that you don't start setting up your end users with logins and access here. But I do have a methodology for you to do this. So I'm going to set this up to go to my email address, and then I would utilize my Outlook rules in order to route this to the appropriate contacts when they come in. Here from a settings perspective, we're going to go in here and we're going to use this all devices AU. I'm going to set a subject, which is backup and recovery, the view name, which is going to be all devices AU. We can add additional variables in here like completed counts or unsuccessful counts or over 48 hours ago counts of that nature. We set the days and the time. We tell it to include the summary and to even send the email if there are no devices in the list. So we'll save that. That's going to show up now on a daily or weekly basis, depending on what you choose. And I can come in here and say, send it now to get a preview of that. And let me see if my email is up and running. I will try to get this out for you as well. So here is that sample report that I just sent out. So you can see the customer that I filtered on. You can see the count of servers and workstations and devices. One with no backup, 1 completed, 3 unsuccessful. 1 was more than 48 hours ago, and 4 of which have not had a successful backup. So they've never had that initial backup ran on those, right? Last successful, never, down here you can see. And what you're going to get in this view are the first 10 columns wide and 200 devices deep. And then, of course, a link to log into the console as an administrator where you could manage or monitor. Additionally, your customer, though, would not be able to log into the console here because he would not have credentials. So that may be a quick workaround for it. There are some methodologies that Dev is working on from a roadmap item, hashtag forward-looking statements. And that's going to be delivered here as this external recipients. We'll be able to enter specific end customers for these views that don't have backup user login access. But this guy not fully exposed yet for primetime use. But I do have some API functionality that can allow you to get pretty close to that. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. Andy was saying, fairly new to enable backup, but had used it several years ago under the Max Backup and the ISO brands. Awesome new changes. Appreciate that. Appreciate that, Andy. Automated deployment. Andy, you're saying you've got about 700 machines in it for now, for the past 1 or 2 months. Several machines that are using OneDrive locally, they're having issues backing up files that are not fully synced. basically just a pointer file until it's used. So that is normal, although I think I could set up a filter for you possibly that might allow us to filter this out so you're not seeing complete with errors and you're just getting the successes. I may need to go with you offline on that one too, looking a little bit deeper, maybe do a remote session where we can actually hop in and see some of those devices. There's two things. One, we addressed some various reparse point errors that were dealing with those offline files. I want to say that this particular error, though, has to do with files that were trying to be synced but no longer exist. So I think actually some reconfiguration inside of OneDrive will fix this issue. So we may not necessarily have to exclude it. So Greg's asking, have we seen implementations where the local speed vault is actually located on a remote location across a VPN? Greg, I've had a couple customers that have tried to do remote VPN, remote LSVs, remote local speed vaults across a VPN. It's really not recommended. If you're trying to get a offsite copy of the data that's encrypted, deduped, and compressed, I have scripts that are available that can allow you to create that speed vault from the cloud copy of the data and create it at the secondary site without having to go across that VPN connection. And that might be a better approach for you. It's listed as an offline or an off-site speed vault. I think that's the name of the script. And I'll show you guys where my scripting repository is here in just a couple moments. But I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail on that one too if you want to take that one offline, Greg. So Jeffrey had responded back to the earlier question around just the size of his environment. So yeah, 3.36 terabytes of data. The C volume is much, I'm sorry, the C volume is a small OS volume, the D is much larger. So Jeffrey, if you wanted to just deselect the D volume down from a disaster recovery perspective down to something that's going to be under that 2 terabyte limit, you could get a temporary recovery test to look at a bootable system. Obviously, it's not a full recovery, it's not a full validation. But it would allow you to do it in our environment. If you want to just do it as a sample test into your configuration or your environment, like I said, a Hyper-V role with the recovery console installed, or even a Windows 10 Pro workstation with the Hyper-V role turned on could run that recovery console and do that restore, assuming you've got enough underlying disk space. Okay. If you need to remove dump directories or temp directories, you want to drop out the SQL database or the Exchange database, information store, things like that, you could do that also and test the recoverability of the application side without the databases in place. So a couple options. So Greg's asking, I remember hearing something about a continuous restore setup where we have a standby system that's continuously restoring as soon as the original system backup is complete. If you know what I'm talking about, can you speak about that type of setup? Absolutely, so Greg. That was what I was referring to with the recovery testing that Jeffrey was talking about. You're going to download this recovery console from the download sections. Recovery console can be configured to do virtual disaster recovery in an on-demand reactive or in a proactive continuous recovery mode where it monitors the cloud backups. And once they synchronize to the cloud, it does a restore of that data to an offline virtual machine, providing Delta daily updates. It gives you that standby capability. Should your customer have a failure, then you've got a VM sitting there on a hypervisor, either at your data center or in Azure or at customer secondary colo or what have you, that you could spin up as a BDR for them. So Tim is saying that about 15% of his server backups are having system state backup failures. Generally speaking, best practice for troubleshooting this is to environments or other environments that are more prone to system state failures. So Tim, system state is one of the more delicate areas. There's so many different VSS riders tied to doing a system state backup. It's what we use to capture everything we need for virtual disaster recovery. It's what Windows uses for their ASR, automated system recovery, and it is one of the most delicate pieces. So there may be a need to re-register the components. There may be a case of VSS space running out of VSS space. If you're using other products that are VSS aware that generate VSS snapshots, those could be conflicting or overlapping. For instance, if you're using Sentinel-1, Sentinel-1 utilizes VSS for rollback capability, and if you've configured just a very minimal amount of space for Sentinel-1, it could be consuming all of that space for its rollback capability instead of allowing some of it to be utilized for the backup sessions. Another way to diagnose or troubleshoot your VSS problems would be to grab a device where you've got a problem or an error, click the device itself, and come in here and use this launch internal info page. Launch internal info is going to give you the equivalent of VSS admin, list shadows, list writers, list shadow storage, and so on in a live context, and present that as a web page. So you can look at the current VSS errors and problems. It'll even parse the Windows event log to look for errors around the time of the backup run and show those to you. If for some reason generating that internal info page is not working, that could be indicative of a bigger VSS problem where VSS is not properly configured or not running on the system. It's got permissions problems, things of that nature. I've even seen AD problems cause issues with VSS. So there's lots of options there. Would be happy to schedule a health check with you if you'd like to go through and just look at a couple of those really quickly, or if you've got open support tickets, if you'd like to drop me an email with a couple of those support tickets, I could take a look at those as well and maybe provide some additional insight. So James is asking, is there any way to do something about integrating, grabbing like sizes and pulling that into ticketing and so on into ConnectWise for Autotask, for example? I can definitely give you the information, and I already have scripts and APIs that can help with that one. I'll be talking about an API class I'm actually doing this week, tomorrow. I've got 2 API classes tomorrow that talk through APIs. So I can definitely give you the API calls or the ability to pull on demand device usage. Dumping that into your PSA tool, that was a little bit more problematic. The question is does the API tool need to request the information? Is it going to call the API to pull it, or do we need to run one API to pull the data and another API to ingest the data in? So then you'd have to have your Incentral or your RMM tool, running a script that's going to request and then inject the data. I would be more than happy to work with any partners out there that are utilizing our tools or third-party PSA tools to kind of grab that data and pull it in. Everybody's request is a little bit different. So obviously I can mimic or take the work that we've done and broaden it for use with other partners. But me doing it strictly inside of a vacuum doesn't always work, because my context of how you're going to bill your customers and how you're going to itemize those products and so on may not line up with yours. So definitely happy to work with you on that, James, to help build something out. Pay close attention to some of the API stuff I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. Cody was saying, how long do virtual drives last for? You'd like to have a user be able to access the information. So virtual drives are providing visibility to the dedupe file system that we've backed up, the dedupe store. So that virtual drive letter is there regardless, and it's going to always present the visibility to the most recent backup sessions. So it doesn't expire, doesn't go away. It may cache some of the data for a short period of time and then have to reprocess it again later if it hasn't been used. And that's a timeout value that can be set with a config.ini setting. And that is available in the documentation, all of the variables for virtual drive. The other question that Cody had is, what is the data limit we can back up at once or store in total, and what is the retention for the files and folders, system state, and so on? If you're using the standalone backup version here, that retention structure is effectively unlimited. You can set up archives and extended retention for all of your data sources to keep 30, 60, 90 days of daily backups for your file system and your system state, and then have end of week, end of quarter, end of month, end of year archive points that you're going to retain effectively indefinitely. They don't auto expire today. And you can do this archiving inside of any of the versions, standalone or integrated versions of backup. However, if you're using integrated RMM, your default or base retention is going to be limited to 30 days for your data sources. 28 days for your data sources. If you're using the integrated Incentral, it would be either 28, 60, or 90 options. But that archive rule is available still for all backup data items, and it would retain the data, as long as you keep those archives in the system. As far as for how much data can you back up, we've got various licensing and structure models for this. Typical models are going to be per server, per workstation models with a fair use cap. It may be anywhere from 500 to 2 terabytes for a server, or 100 to 500 gigabytes for a workstation. And those are going to vary once again depending on your licensing model or your licensing plans. I'd suggest you reach out to your customer success or your account manager for more details on that one. They give you exactly what your account is tied to. Normally it's based on selected size, not used storage or retention though, okay? We've got some fairly strict firewall rules across the business. Is there a list of IP address ranges to allow someone somewhere for the essential backups? You ran into issues using the fully qualified domain names that are outlined. So Chris, you can get the current list of IP addresses. You would need to open a support ticket for that one. Basically just let them know the exact same things you just told me, and that the fully qualified domain names are not usable for your particular firewall, and they can provide you the current IP address list. Just set yourself a reminder for 30 days or 30, 60, 90 days out, so that you can ensure that you are requesting updates to that one, because as we do add additional storage nodes, those ranges or those are the IP addresses could be adjusted. And we don't want to block your ability to access new storage nodes as they come online. But they can provide those for you based on your region of deployment. So all the IPs that are utilized for the US or for Canada or the UK, so on. To Harris, I'm assuming for bare metal recovery, you would need system state and program data and program files, x86 users, and Windows as a minimum. So Stu, for a bare metal recovery, we recommend the bootable file system and system state as the minimum requirements. Obviously, any data volumes that you want to recover would have to be protected as well. Even though you might not recover them as part of the bare metal, you'd want to have them as part of the daily backup, so they're available as a secondary or post restore. You can exclude data volumes, directories, file extensions from a backup, but don't exclude any extensions or directories that are going to prevent the system from being bootable. You could break the ability to do bare metal recovery by removing that System32 directory, for example. So I wouldn't get selective on what you include. I would get selective on what you exclude to make sure it's not something that is required for a bootable OS.